I never believed in fate until I found the journal hidden in my grandmother's attic. Written in her trembling handwriting were details about my life that she couldn't possibly have known. My failed marriage, my struggle with depression, even the scar on my left hand from an accident that happened years after she died. But the most chilling part wasn't what she knew about my past. It was what she wrote about my future. The journal spoke of soul contracts, agreements we supposedly make before birth, choosing our families, our pain, our purpose. According to grandmother's notes, she had been part of a secret group in rural Montana that practiced what they called contract reading. They claimed they could see the invisible threads that bind souls together across lifetimes, the debts we owe, the lessons we're forced to learn. At first, I dismissed it as the ramblings of a woman losing her mind to dementia. But then strange things started happening. People from my past began appearing in my small Oregon town, people who had no reason to be there. Old friends, former enemies, even my ex-husband who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. They all claimed they felt drawn to find me, compelled by dreams they couldn't explain. That's when I realized the journal wasn't just documenting soul contracts. It was a manual for manipulating them. The pages were filled with rituals, incantations, and detailed instructions for what grandmother called contract enforcement. She had learned to pull the strings that connected souls, to force people into situations they had supposedly agreed to experience. But manipulating fate comes with a price. The deeper I dug into grandmother's work, the more I understood that some contracts aren't meant to be fulfilled in this lifetime. Some agreements are so dark, so twisted, that breaking them requires sacrifices most people aren't willing to make. And some souls will do anything, including murder, to escape the roles they chose before birth. Now I'm trapped in a web of supernatural manipulation and psychological terror, where everyone I meet might be playing out a predetermined script. My own family members are turning against me, claiming I owe them debts from past lives. My best friend insists we made a pact that requires my suffering. Even my therapist seems to know more about my contracts than she should. The worst part is the growing suspicion that I'm not just discovering these soul contracts. I'm the one who wrote them. Every person who's entered my life, every trauma I've endured, every moment of joy and pain might be exactly what I planned for myself in some cosmic realm I can't remember. And if that's true, then the horror I'm living through now is just the beginning of what I agreed to experience. As the line between reality and supernatural manipulation blurs, I'm forced to confront a terrifying question. If we really do choose our lives before birth, what kind of monster was I in the space between worlds? And what did I agree to become? I should have burned that house down the day I inherited it. Grandmother's place sat like a wound on the Oregon hillside, all rotting wood and broken shutters. 3 months after her funeral, I finally worked up the courage to clean it out. The smell hit me the moment I opened the front door. Not death, exactly, but something stale and wrong, like flowers left too long in dirty water. The main floor was what you'd expect from an old woman with dementia. Newspapers stacked to the ceiling, cat food cans lined up in perfect rows despite her never owning a cat, and family photos turned face down on every surface. But it was the attic that changed everything. I was up there on a Tuesday afternoon, sorting through boxes of moth-eaten clothes, when I found the loose floorboard. It wasn't hidden, just warped enough that it creaked differently when I stepped on it. Underneath, wrapped in oiled cloth like some precious relic, was a leather journal I'd never seen before. The first page made my stomach drop. Contract record subject, Elena Martinez, born October 15th, 1991. Oh, that was me. My full name, my exact birth date written in grandmother's spidery handwriting. But the date at the top of the page was from 2018, 5 years after she'd been diagnosed with dementia. 2 years after she'd forgotten my name entirely. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. Everything was there. My divorce from Marcus in 2019. My struggle with depression that started in 2020. Even the scar on my left hand from when I'd slipped with a kitchen knife last Christmas. Details no one else knew about written in a book that should have been impossible for her to write. But those weren't the worst parts. The worst parts were the things that hadn't happened yet. Subject will experience major financial loss in March 2024. I read that line sitting in my car after being laid off 3 weeks ago. Subject will relocate to family property following inheritance. I was literally sitting in that property, reading about my decision to move there before I'd even made it. Subject will discover photographs on April 3rd, 2024. Today was April 3rd. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I turned to the back of the journal. There, tucked between the last pages, were 3 Polaroid photographs. The first showed me standing in what looked like this very attic, holding the journal I was currently reading. The second was me asleep in a bed I didn't recognize with someone's shadow falling across my face. The third made me drop the book. It was definitely me, but my left eye was swollen shut, purple and black like a rotten plum. My lip was split, and there were finger-shaped bruises around my throat. At the bottom in grandmother's careful script, April 4th, 2024. Contract enforcement begins. Tomorrow. I scrambled to pick up the journal, pages fluttering as it hit the floor. When I found my place again, there was a section I swear hadn't been there before. The weavers understand that some souls resist their chosen path. When gentle guidance fails, enforcement becomes necessary. The subject has been prepared through previous incarnations to accept her role. Resistance will be met with escalation until compliance is achieved. The temperature in the attic plummeted. I could see my breath suddenly, little puffs of white in air that had been warm moments before. The single bulb overhead flickered, casting dancing shadows across the journal's pages. That's when I heard it, a sound like fabric tearing coming from somewhere deeper in the house. Not from below where I'd expect, but from above, as if something was moving around on a second attic floor that didn't exist. I slammed the journal shut and ran. But even as I drove away, speeding down the winding mountain road with my heart hammering against my ribs, I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving wouldn't matter. According to that journal, everything was already decided. My grandmother had somehow written my future, and tomorrow I was going to pay for it. The really terrifying part wasn't that she seemed to know what would happen to me. It was that she seemed to be the one planning it. I spent that night in a motel 20 miles away, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph of my battered face, and I felt fingers that weren't there touching my throat. The nocebo effect, maybe. My mind creating physical sensations based on expectations of harm. But the bruises I kept checking for in the mirror felt real enough. Around 3 a.m. I finally drifted off. I woke up with a black eye. The mirror didn't lie, even though I desperately wanted it to. My left eye was swollen nearly shut, the skin around it a mottled purple-black that matched the photograph exactly. I pressed my fingers to the tender flesh, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through my skull. No memory of being hit. No recollection of falling or walking into anything. I'd gone to sleep unmarked and woke up looking like someone had used my face as a punching bag. The motel room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in like they were eager to whisper secrets I didn't want to hear. I had packed my things with shaking hands, avoiding my reflection as much as possible. Every glance showed me grandmother's prediction staring back, and I couldn't tell if I was more terrified of the accuracy or the implications. By 10 a.m., I was back in town, buying concealer at the local drugstore. The teenage cashier kept staring at my eye with that mix of concern and curiosity people get around obvious violence. I mumbled something about walking into a door, hating how easily the lie came. That's when I saw Marcus through the store window. My ex-husband was supposed to be in California, working at some tech startup and living with the woman he'd left me for. Instead, he was standing across the street, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, staring directly at me through the glass. Our eyes met, and he raised one hand in a small wave that made my stomach clench. I bought my concealer and practically ran to my car, but he was waiting in the parking lot. Elena Dot. His voice was softer than I remembered, almost apologetic. I know this is weird, but I had to come find you. You had to? I kept my distance, keys ready in my hand like a weapon. Marcus We haven't spoken in 2 years. What are you even doing in Oregon?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from our marriage. "I've been having these dreams, really vivid ones, every night for the past week. I dream about you calling for help. You're in this old house and something terrible is happening, and you need me to—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "I know how it sounds. It sounds insane," I said, but my voice came out weaker than I intended. The journal had mentioned him. I was sure of it. "The dreams feel more real than real life," he continued, stepping closer. "I can smell the dust in the air, hear floorboards creaking, and there's this feeling like I owe you something important, like I made you a promise I never kept." His eyes focused on my concealed bruise. "Jesus, Elena, what happened to your face?" Before I could answer, another voice called my name. "Elena Martinez? Oh my God, it really is you." Sarah Chen, my former best friend from college, was walking toward us from the coffee shop next door. I hadn't seen her since she'd moved to Seattle 3 years ago, after a bitter fight about her borrowing money she never paid back. Now she looked exactly the same, down to the vintage band t-shirt and messy bun that had been her signature look. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" The words felt thick and strange in my mouth. She laughed, but it sounded forced. "This is going to sound crazy, but I've been having the most intense dreams about you. Every night for a week, you're in trouble and I need to help you with something. I woke up yesterday with this overwhelming urge to drive down here. I couldn't focus on anything else until I got in my car." Marcus and I exchanged glances. The same dreams, the same compulsion. "Where are you staying?" Sarah asked. And when I told her about the motel, she shook her head. "That's ridiculous. You should stay at your grandmother's place. I mean, you inherited it, right?" I hadn't told her about the inheritance. We hadn't spoken in years. "How did you know it, Pout?" "The dreams," she said quickly. "I saw the house in the dreams, Victorian style, up on the hill overlooking town. Your grandmother left it to you after she died last winter." The specificity made my skin crawl. Grandmother had died in February, but I'd never mentioned it to Sarah. We weren't in touch. There was no way she could know these details unless— "I need to go," I said, backing toward my car. "Elena, wait." Marcus grabbed my arm and I flinched at the contact. "I know this is all strange, but the dreams, they're not just about helping you. They're about paying a debt. Like I owe you something from a long time ago, something important." Sarah nodded eagerly. "Yes, that's exactly what I've been feeling. This overwhelming sense that I need to make something right with you. Like we made an agreement, and I haven't held up my end." They were both staring at me with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. The afternoon sun felt too bright, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move independently of the clouds above. I could smell something burning. Not quite smoke, more like the acrid scent of hair being singed. "I have to think about this," I said, fumbling with my car keys. "Don't think too long," Sarah called as I got into my car. "The dreams are getting stronger, more urgent. I don't think we have much time." I drove back to the motel in a daze, my mind reeling. 2 people from my past, both showing up on the same day, both driven by identical dreams about owing me debts. It was too coincidental to be natural, too specific to be coincidence. That evening I opened Grandmother's journal again, this time focusing on the earlier entries. There, written in faded blue ink, were their names. Marcus Rivera, former spouse, primary debt, unresolved. Will respond to proximity triggers and dream insertion. Compliance expected within 48 hours. Sarah Chen, former friend, secondary debt holder, emotional manipulation protocols activated. Useful for isolation phase. Below their names was a single line that made my blood freeze. Contract enforcement, phase 1. Gather the obligated parties. I was still staring at the page when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hey Elena, it's Jake Morrison from high school. I know this is random, but I'm in town and really need to see you. Can we meet tomorrow? It's important. Jake Morrison, the boy who'd made my sophomore year hell with his constant bullying and cruel pranks. I hadn't thought about him in 15 years. I flipped frantically through the journal until I found his name written in grandmother's careful script. Jake Morrison, childhood antagonist, tertiary enforcement role, physical intimidation specialist. Activation pending phase 1 completion. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I scrolled up through Jake's message, checking the timestamp. He'd sent it at exactly 11:47 p.m. According to the journal's margin notes, that was precisely when Phase 2, direct confrontation protocols, was scheduled to begin. Outside my motel window, I heard footsteps crunching across the gravel parking lot. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, listening. 3 soft knocks. Elena? Marcus's voice muffled through the door. I know you're in there. We need to talk about our dreams, about what we owe you. She's right. Sarah's voice joined his. We can't leave until we make this right. I stayed perfectly still, not even breathing, until their footsteps finally retreated. But even after they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper than they should be, and I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision that disappeared when I turned to look. The journal lay open beside me, and in the dim light from the parking lot, I could swear the words were rearranging themselves, writing a new entry in real time. Phase 2 initiated. Subject showing expected resistance patterns. Escalation authorized. I must have been hallucinating from stress and lack of sleep. Words don't write themselves. But when I woke up the next morning, there was a new photograph tucked between the journal pages. A picture of me sleeping in this very motel bed, taken from inside the room. Someone had been watching me all night. The photograph was still warm when I found it. Fresh Polaroid, the chemical smell of developing film hanging in the air like a threat. In the picture, I was sprawled across the motel bed, mouth slightly open, completely vulnerable. But what made my hands shake wasn't seeing myself asleep. It was the angle. The photo was taken from the foot of the bed, maybe 3 feet away from where I'd been lying. Someone had been standing in my room, watching me sleep, close enough to touch. I checked the door. Still locked, chain still in place. The windows were sealed shut, painted over years ago. There was no way in or out except through the door I'd barricaded with a chair. Yet somehow, someone had gotten inside, taken a photograph, and left without waking me. I was packed and out of there within 10 minutes. The Oregon State Library was my first stop, a safe, public place where I could research without feeling like I was being watched. I started with my grandmother's name, digging through local newspaper archives and historical records. What I found made my stomach turn. Gladys Martinez hadn't always lived alone on that hillside. In the 1970s, she'd been part of a group called the Weavers, a spiritual commune that practiced what they called destiny weaving. According to a 1978 article in the county paper, they believed human souls made contracts before birth, agreements about who they'd meet, what they'd suffer, what debts they'd pay throughout lifetimes. The article was mostly dismissive, treating them like harmless hippies playing with crystals and tarot cards. But buried in the back pages of subsequent issues, I found the darker truth. Missing persons report. Always the same pattern. Someone would join the Weavers, participate in their contract readings, and then vanish. The police investigated twice, but no bodies were ever found. No evidence of foul play. Just people who walked away from their lives and were never seen again. The group disbanded in 1981 after their leader, a woman named Patricia Voss, died in what was ruled an accidental drowning. But the death certificate, which I found on a genealogy website, told a different story. Cause of death: drowning. Contributing factors: multiple lacerations consistent with ritualistic cutting and severe psychological trauma. She hadn't drowned accidentally. She'd been sacrificed. I was deep in a 1979 police report when someone sat down at the computer terminal next to mine. I looked up to see an elderly Asian woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her. "You're researching the Weavers," she said quietly, glancing at my screen. It wasn't a question. "Do I know you?" I asked, my hand moving instinctively toward the pepper spray in my purse. "I'm Mrs. Chen. I live 3 houses down from your grandmother's place." She extended a weathered hand. "I was wondering when you'd start asking the right questions." Sarah's last name was Chen. This woman had the same delicate bone structure, the same intelligent eyes. "Are you related to Sarah Chen?" "My granddaughter." Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. "She didn't come here by coincidence, you know. None of them did." The library suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. I could hear the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the distant whisper of pages turning. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Chen leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I was part of the Weavers back in the day. Young and foolish, looking for meaning in all the wrong places. Your grandmother was my closest friend then. We learned together, practiced together, made terrible mistakes together." "Mistakes?" "We thought we were helping people understand their destinies. Patricia taught us to read the contract souls made before birth, who they'd love, who they'd lose, what pain they'd chosen for themselves. But reading wasn't enough for Patricia. She wanted to enforce the contracts, to make sure people fulfilled their spiritual obligations whether they wanted to or not." My mouth went dry. "How?" "Psychological manipulation at first. We'd study someone for months, learn about their vulnerabilities, their fears. Then we'd orchestrate situations to push them toward their destined experiences. Lost loves would reappear at crucial moments. Enemies would resurface to force confrontations. We told ourselves we were helping souls grow free." The blood was rushing in my ears. And when did people resist? Patricia developed stronger methods. She called them enforcement protocols, drugs that caused vivid dreams and compulsions. Hypnosis sessions are disguised as spiritual guidance. And for the truly stubborn cases, Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. She learned to use objects as focal points, dolls, photographs, personal belongings. She could create psychological connections that felt supernatural to the victims. "Victims," I repeated, the word heavy on my tongue. "That's what they became. People forced into situations they never would have chosen, convinced they were fulfilling cosmic obligations. Some had breakdowns, others disappeared entirely, and a few—" She paused, wrapping her arms around herself. "A few fought back. Patricia didn't survive the encounter." I thought of the death certificate, the ritualistic cuts. Someone killed her. Someone she was trying to help understand their contract. A young man who'd lost everything because of her manipulations. His family, his job, his sanity. When he realized what she'd done to him, he paid her back in kind. The library felt colder suddenly, as if someone had opened a door to winter. But the group disbanded after that, right? It's been over 40 years. Mrs. Chen shook her head slowly. "The Weavers never really ended. They just went underground. Your grandmother was Patricia's most gifted student. She inherited the knowledge, the techniques, the collection." "Collection?" "The tools Patricia used for enforcement. Dolls containing hair and nail clippings from dozens of people. Photographs that could induce psychological connections. Journals documenting every person's supposed contract and obligation." Mrs. Chen's eyes met mine. "I think you know what I'm talking about." I felt sick. The journal, the dolls I hadn't found yet, the photographs appearing like magic. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're in danger. Your grandmother spent 40 years perfecting Patricia's methods. She documented everyone she could influence, planned out their entire life trajectories, and according to her notes." Mrs. Chen reached into her purse, and pulled out a Xeroxed page. You weren't just her test subject. You were her replacement. The paper was covered in grandmother's handwriting, but the words seemed to writhe on the page as I read. Elena has been prepared from birth to inherit the Weaver legacy. Her isolation, her vulnerabilities, her connection to the original subjects, all carefully orchestrated. Upon my death, she will discover the journals and begin the awakening process. The others will come to her, drawn by protocols established in their youth. She will have no choice but to assume the keeper role or face elimination. Elimination. My voice cracked. The people coming to find you, Marcus. Sarah, this Jake person, they're not here by accident. They've been psychologically conditioned since childhood to respond to specific triggers. Your grandmother planted the seeds decades ago through brief encounters, drugged interactions, objects left in their homes. When activated, they feel compelled to seek you out and fulfill their assigned role. What roles? Marcus is meant to isolate you through emotional manipulation. Sarah will provide social pressure and false support. Jake, Mrs. Chen's face paled. Jake is meant to provide physical enforcement if you refuse to cooperate. I stood up so quickly the chair scraped across the floor. I have to get out of here. Leave town, change my name, disappear. It won't work. Mrs. Chen grabbed my arm with surprising strength. The conditioning goes too deep. They'll follow you anywhere, driven by compulsions they can't understand or resist. The only way to break free is to understand what your grandmother really left you. The house? The basement of the house. That's where she kept Patricia's original collection. Hundreds of objects tied to hundreds of people, some dating back to the 1970s. If you can destroy the collection, you can break the psychological connections, free the people under compulsion, and free yourself from the role she planned for you. And if I can't, Mrs. Chen's eyes were infinitely sad. Then you'll become what she was. You'll use the collection to control others, to enforce their supposed contracts, to continue the cycle, the isolation and manipulation you've experienced. They weren't random cruelty. They were training. Your grandmother was preparing you to understand how it feels to be controlled, so you'd know how to control others. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows across the library stacks. In the distance, I heard footsteps on tile floors, getting closer. Elena? Marcus's voice echoed through the building. I saw your car outside. We need to talk. Mrs. Chen pressed something into my hand, a small silver key. Basement door behind the furnace. But be careful. Your grandmother left protections in place. The collection doesn't want to be destroyed. Elena? Sarah's voice now coming from the opposite direction. We know you're here. Stop running from us. I looked at the key, then at Mrs. Chen. Why are you helping me? Because my granddaughter is one of the conditioned ones. She's been having the dreams, feeling the compulsions. If you can break the collection, you can save her too. Tears ran down her weathered cheeks. I helped your grandmother create this nightmare. The least I can do is help you end it. The footsteps were getting closer, approaching from both sides. I was trapped between Marcus and Sarah, with only one way out, deeper into the stacks, toward the back exit I'd noticed earlier. Go, Mrs. Chen whispered. But remember, the collection has been feeding on psychic energy for decades. It's developed a kind of awareness, a will to survive. It won't go quietly. I ran, clutching the key in my sweaty palm. Behind me, I heard Marcus and Sarah converge on Mrs. Chen, their voices urgent and demanding. But as I reached the emergency exit, I heard something else that made my blood freeze. Mrs. Chen screaming, not in pain, in terror. A sound of such pure animal fear that it stopped me in my tracks. I turned back, seeing them through the gaps in the book stacks. Marcus and Sarah were standing over Mrs. Chen, but they weren't threatening her. They were perfectly still, staring down at her with blank, empty expressions. And Mrs. Chen was looking up at them with wide, horrified eyes, her mouth moving soundlessly. That's when I realized the truth. Mrs. Chen hadn't been helping me out of guilt or compassion. She'd been buying time for Marcus and Sarah to get into position. The conditioning didn't just make them want to find me. It made them want to help each other. They were a team now, working together with the coordinated efficiency of predators. And I was their prey. I burst through the emergency exit into the late afternoon sun, the alarm blaring behind me. My car was parked around front, but going back would mean walking right into their trap. Instead, I ran toward the tree line behind the library, branches scratching at my face as I plunged into the Oregon wilderness. Behind me, I heard the library door slam open, footsteps on concrete, then on dead leaves. They were following, but they weren't hurrying. They didn't need to. After all, according to Grandmother's journal, I'd already agreed to this chase. The question was, when they finally caught me, would I remember making that agreement? The basement stairs creaked under my weight like old bones breaking. I wasn't supposed to be down here. Hell, I didn't even know there was a basement until I noticed the draft coming from behind the kitchen pantry. The hidden door had been painted over so many times it looked like part of the wall. But when I pressed against it, it swung open with a groan that made my teeth ache. The smell hit me first. Old flowers mixed with something metallic, like pennies left in stagnant water. My phone's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a room that shouldn't have existed. The basement was bigger than the house above it, stretching back into shadows that seemed to swallow my life. But it was the dolls that made my blood freeze. Hundreds of them lined wooden shelves that ran from floor to ceiling. Antique porcelain faces stared at me with glass eyes that caught my flashlight beam and threw it back like tiny mirrors. Some were beautiful, Victorian ladies in elaborate gowns. Others were crude, handmade things with button eyes and yarn hair. But every single one had a white tag tied around its neck with black thread. I approached the nearest shelf, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. The first doll wore a blue dress and had Sarah's name written in Grandmother's spidery handwriting. Next to it sat a male doll in a tiny suit, Marcus. Then Jake, Emma, David, Dr. Reeves. My throat closed up when I saw it. At the end of the first shelf, sitting apart from the others, was a doll that looked exactly like me as a child. Same dark hair, same green eyes, even the same small scar on the chin from when I fell off my bike at age 7. The tag around its neck simply read Contract Keeper. When I reached out to touch it, the doll's head turned. I jerked my hand back, heart hammering against my ribs. The doll's painted lips curved into a smile that hadn't been there before. But that was impossible. I was seeing things. The stress, the lack of sleep, the pills Dr. Reeves had been giving me, they were making me hallucinate. But then I noticed the small wooden boxes beneath each doll. I opened the one under Sarah's effigy with trembling fingers. Inside was a lock of blonde hair tied with a red ribbon, a fingernail painted with chipped purple polish, and a photograph of Sarah and me from high school. Things that had been in my possession. Things I'd never given to anyone. The box under Marcus's doll contained one of his old wedding rings and a piece of fabric from the shirt he wore on our last anniversary. Under Jake's doll was a bloody tissue, the one I'd used after he gave me that black eye in 10th grade, the one I thought I'd thrown away 20 years ago. Each box was a tiny shrine to violation, filled with pieces of people's lives they'd never willingly surrendered. When I opened my own doll's box, memories flooded through me like ice water. But they weren't my memories. I was standing in a room that existed between worlds, surrounded by swirling mists and voices that spoke in languages I'd never learned but somehow understood. Other souls floated around me like jellyfish in a dark ocean, their forms shifting and translucent. We were choosing, all of us, picking our next lives like items from a cosmic menu. I want to understand suffering, I heard my own voice say, though it came from everywhere and nowhere. I want to know betrayal, abandonment, depression. I want to feel what it's like to be broken so I can learn to heal others. The memory vision showed me selecting Marcus as my husband, knowing he would cheat and leave me hollow. I chose Sarah as my best friend, knowing she would turn on me when I needed her most. I picked Jake as my tormentor, requesting the exact amount of trauma that would shape my empathy without destroying me completely. Most horrifying of all, I chose my family. I picked Emma with her schizophrenia and David with his narcissistic cruelty, knowing they would teach me about mental illness and manipulation. I selected my grandmother as my teacher, knowing she would pass down both the curse and the power to break it. The vision showed me writing out a contract in flowing script that burned like starlight. I agreed to experience profound suffering in my incarnation as the one called Rebecca. I will endure betrayal, abandonment, and psychological torment. In exchange, I will gain the knowledge necessary to free others from their own chosen prisons. When the time comes, I will inherit the role of contract keeper and help other souls escape the agreements they no longer wish to honor. When the memory faded, I was back in the basement, tears streaming down my face. The doll in my hands was warm, as if it had absorbed body heat from somewhere else. Its painted eyes seemed to look right through me. I wasn't a victim. I was the architect of my own misery, the author of every heartbreak and disappointment I'd ever experienced. But if that was true, then everyone else down here, everyone whose essence was trapped in porcelain and wood, had made similar choices. They'd agreed to play their roles in my cosmic education. So why were they trying so hard to escape their contracts now? I was about to put my doll back when I noticed something carved into its base. Words so small I had to use my phone's magnifying feature to read them. The student becomes the teacher. The teacher becomes the sacrifice. That's when I heard the footsteps upstairs. Heavy boots walking back and forth across my living room floor, like someone pacing while they waited for me to come up. But I'd locked all the doors. I was alone in the house. Wasn't I? The footsteps stopped the moment I reached the top of the basement stairs. My living room was empty, but the air felt different, charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees, and my breath came out in small puffs of vapor. That's when I noticed the symbols. Someone had drawn them on my walls while I was downstairs. Geometric patterns in what looked like charcoal, covering every flat surface in my living room. They hurt to look at directly, making my eyes water and my head pound. The symbols seemed to shift when I wasn't focusing on them, rearranging themselves into new configurations that made my stomach lurch. Rebecca. I spun around. Emma stood in my kitchen doorway, but she looked wrong. Her usually perfect blonde hair hung in greasy tangles around her face, and her clothes were stained with something dark. But it was her eyes that made me step backward. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like someone had filled them with ink. Emma, how did you get in here? She tilted her head at an unnatural angle, like a bird studying a bug. The voices told me to come. They said it was time for the blood contracts to be fulfilled. Her voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. They told me you've been reading Grandmother's journal, learning about what we really are. We're family, I said, though my mouth felt full of cotton. That's all we are. Just family. Emma laughed, and the sound made every glass in my kitchen cabinet rattle. Family. Yes, we chose each other, didn't we? Before we were born in that place between worlds. You remember now, don't you? I can see it in your eyes. She was right. Ever since touching that doll, memories kept surfacing like bubbles in dark water. Fragments of that otherworldly room where souls made their bargain. I remember choosing Emma as my sister, but not for love or companionship. I'd chosen her because I knew she would develop schizophrenia, and I wanted to understand mental illness from the inside. But in return, Emma had chosen me for something else entirely. I agreed to be your teacher, she said, as if reading my thoughts, to show you what it looks like when a mind breaks completely. But the contract had a clause, Rebecca. When my lesson was complete, when you'd learned everything you needed to know about madness. She smiled, and her teeth were stained red. I get to take your sanity as payment. The front door opened, and David walked in like he owned the place. My cousin had always been handsome in a calculated way, but now there was something predatory about him that made my skin crawl. He moved with the fluid confidence of a hunting cat, and his smile was all sharp edges. "Hello, cousin," he said, and his voice carried that particular tone narcissists use when they're about to explain why you're wrong about everything. "I see Emma's already started the family reunion. David, what the hell is going on? How did you both get in here?" "Oh, Rebecca." He clicked his tongue like I was a disappointing child. "Still pretending you don't understand. Still acting like you're the victim in all this." He gestured to the symbols on my walls. "These are summoning circles. They call those of us bound by blood contracts. Once they're activated, we have no choice but to come." "I didn't draw these," I said. "No," Emma whispered, her black eyes reflecting the overhead light. "But you wanted to. Deep down, in that part of your soul that remembers making the agreements, you called to us." David pulled out a leather-bound book that looked identical to grandmother's journal, except this one had my name embossed on the cover in gold letters. "Every contract keeper gets their own book when they inherit the position. Yours has been waiting for you your whole life." He opened it to the first page, and I saw my own handwriting, but not from this lifetime. The script was elegant, flowing, nothing like my usual scrawl. At the top of the page, in letters that seemed to glow with their own light, were the words, "Blood Contracts, Generation 4. "You see," David continued, "our family has been doing this for over a century. Each generation produces one contract keeper and several assistants. Emma and I are your assistants, Rebecca. We agreed to help you maintain the contracts in exchange for certain privileges." "What kind of privileges?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Emma giggled, a sound like breaking glass. "I get to keep the madness I collect from others. Every person whose sanity I steal makes the voices clearer, makes their guidance stronger. Soon I'll be able to hear the thoughts of everyone in town." "And I," David said, straightening his tie with practiced vanity, "get to feed on the life force of those who break their contracts. Every soul that tries to escape their predetermined fate gives me more power, more control. I become more perfect with each feed." They were both completely insane. But a terrifying thing was that part of me, the part that remembered making these agreements in that cosmic space between lives, knew they were telling the truth. "The ritual begins at midnight," Emma said, checking an antique pocket watch that definitely hadn't been in her hand a moment before. "We need to prepare you." "What ritual?" David's smile widened. "The one where you officially become the contract keeper, where you gain the power to see and manipulate every soul agreement in this town. But first," he paused dramatically, savoring the moment. "First, you have to pay the price for all the contracts you've broken." "I haven't broken any contracts." "Haven't you?" Emma's voice had taken on a sing-song quality. "What about your marriage to Marcus? You agreed to stay with him until death, but you filed for divorce. What about your friendship with Sarah? You promised to trust her always, but you've been suspicious of her since she arrived in town." My blood went cold. Those are just normal relationship problems." "Nothing is normal when you're bound by soul contracts," David said. "Every broken promise, every failed commitment, every time you've chosen self-preservation over obligation, it all has to be paid for." The symbols on my walls began to glow with a sickly green light. The temperature dropped even further, and frost started forming on my windows despite the summer heat outside. "The payment," Emma whispered, "is your life." That's when I realized the truth. They weren't here to help me become the contract keeper. They were here to kill me and claim the position for themselves. The family bonds, the blood contracts, the cosmic agreements, it was all just an elaborate justification for murder. But as I backed toward the kitchen door trying to escape, I caught sight of my reflection in the darkened window. My eyes had turned completely black, just like Emma's. Maybe I wasn't trying to escape at all. Maybe I was exactly where I'd agreed to be. Dr. Monica Reeves had the kind of office that was supposed to make you feel safe. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, a small fountain bubbling in a corner. But after everything that had happened with Emma and David, nowhere felt safe anymore. I had managed to get away from them that night, but only because they'd let me go. I could feel them watching me, waiting for something. "You look tired, Rebecca," Dr. Reeves said as I settled into the familiar leather chair across from her desk. "Are you sleeping?" "Not much." I studied her face, looking for signs of the conspiracy I was now convinced surrounded me. But she looked exactly the same as always, mid-50s, graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, wire-rimmed glasses that made her look both intellectual and approachable. "I keep having these dreams, memories that don't feel like mine. Tell me about them." I hesitated. How could I explain that I was remembering choosing my own trauma in some cosmic waiting room? That my entire family seemed to be part of a supernatural cult? That I was seeing symbols that moved on their own and dolls that turned their heads? "It's hard to describe," I said finally. "It's like I'm remembering things that happened before I was born." Dr. Reeves leaned forward slightly, and something flickered in her eyes. Interest, maybe, or recognition. "Past life memories are more common than you might think. Many of my patients experience them during times of stress or major life transition." "You believe in past lives?" "I believe in the power of the subconscious mind to process trauma in ways that feel supernatural." She pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the table between us. "Would you be willing to try regression therapy? It might help you understand what these memories are trying to tell you." Every instinct I had screamed at me to say no. But Dr. Reeves had been the only stable thing in my life since this nightmare began. If anyone could help me separate reality from delusion, it would be her. "Okay," I said, "but I want to stay in control. No deep hypnosis." She smiled. "Of course. Just close your eyes and focus on your breathing." Her voice became softer, more rhythmic. "Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Let your body relax. Feel the tension leaving your shoulders, your arms, your legs." The familiar routine was comforting. I'd done guided relaxation with her dozens of times. But this time, it felt different. Her voice seemed to be coming from very far away, and the chair beneath me felt like it was floating. "Now," she said, "I want you to go back to your earliest memory, not from this life, but from before you were Rebecca. What do you see?" The room around me dissolved. I was in that cosmic space again, the place between worlds where souls made their contracts. But this time I wasn't choosing my next life. I was watching someone else make their selection. A soul that pulsed with dark energy, shifting between forms like smoke. "I want power," the soul said in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. "I want to control others, to feed on their suffering. I choose to be born as someone people will trust. A healer, a guide, someone they'll turn to in their darkest moments." The cosmic beings around this soul recoiled. "That violates the purpose of incarnation," one of them said. "You're supposed to learn and grow, not prey upon others." "Then I'll hide my true nature," the dark soul replied. "I'll study psychology, become a therapist. I'll learn their weaknesses, their traumas, and I'll use that knowledge to control them. They'll never suspect someone who's supposed to help them." The vision shifted, showing me the same soul being born, growing up, studying psychology with an obsessive focus on manipulation and control. I watched it to learn and to use therapeutic techniques not for healing, but for breaking down mental defenses. It specialized in regression therapy, past life work, anything that could implant false memories and reshape personality. "What do you see, Rebecca?" Dr. Reeves's voice cut through the vision like a knife. My eyes snapped open. She was leaning over me, her face inches from mine, and her expression was nothing like the concerned therapist I thought I knew. Her eyes glittered with hunger, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I see you," I whispered. "Good," she said, sitting back. "The drugs are working faster than I expected." Drugs? I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't respond. The room was spinning, and her face kept shifting between humans and something else. Something with too many teeth. "A little cocktail I've been putting in your water," she said casually, gesturing to the glass on the side table. "Scopolamine, ketamine, and a few synthetic compounds of my own design. They make you highly suggestible while creating vivid hallucinations. Perfect for implanting false memories." The recorder on the table wasn't just recording our session. It was playing back sounds at frequencies just below my conscious hearing. Whispers, suggestions, commands that my drugged brain was absorbing without my knowledge. "You see, Rebecca, your grandmother wasn't the only one who understood soul contracts. I've been studying them for decades, learning how to manipulate them, how to make people believe they chose their own suffering." She pulled out a thick file with my name on it. "I've been working on your case for 5 years, ever since you first came to see me for depression." 5 years? My tongue felt thick and clumsy. "But I only started seeing you 3 months ago." "No, dear. You've been seeing me since right after your divorce. But I've been making you forget our sessions, creating false memories of finding me more recently. Every week you come in, I drug you, I plant suggestions and false memories, and then I make you forget. You leave thinking you feel better, not knowing I've been slowly rewriting your entire sense of reality." The room lurched around me as pieces fell into place. The gaps in my memory. The way I sometimes found myself in places with no recollection of how I got there. The dreams that felt too real, too detailed. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Because you're the perfect test subject," she said, making notes in my file. "Isolated, vulnerable, with a family history of mental illness. And now, with your grandmother's death, you've inherited something that makes you even more valuable. Genuine psychic sensitivity. The ability to actually see soul contracts, not just believe in them." She showed me pages covered in my own handwriting, session notes I didn't remember writing, describing visions and memories that felt completely real to my drugged mind. "Every delusion I've implanted, every false memory I've created, you've experienced as absolute truth. The cosmic waiting room, the soul contracts, even your conversations with Emma and David, all products of carefully crafted psychological manipulation, combined with hallucinogenic drugs." "Emma and David are real," I said weakly. "They were in my house." "Were they?" She showed me photos from a security camera I didn't know existed. Footage of me alone in my living room, talking to empty air, drawing symbols on my walls with my own hands, while in a drug-induced trance. Or did you draw those symbols yourself and imagine their presence? The worst part was that I couldn't tell anymore. The line between reality and hallucination had been so thoroughly blurred that I didn't know what to believe. "The journal in your grandmother's attic?" Dr. Reeves continued. "I planted it there during her funeral, filled with information I'd gathered about you over years of therapy. The doll's in the basement. I had them made by a local craftsman, using hair and personal items I collected from your house during our sessions. Every piece of supernatural evidence you found has been carefully placed by me." "But why?" I asked again, though speaking was becoming harder. "What do you want?" "I want to prove that the human mind can be completely controlled through the right combination of drugs, hypnosis, and environmental manipulation. You're going to be my masterpiece, Rebecca. A person who genuinely believes they're living in a supernatural horror story, even though every element has been artificially created." She prepared a syringe filled with something that glowed faintly in the dim light. "This is the final dose. It will make the hallucinations permanent, lock in all the false memories I've created. You'll spend the rest of your life believing in soul contracts and cosmic conspiracies, never knowing that it's all just brain chemistry and psychological manipulation." As she approached with the needle, I realized something that made my blood freeze. Whether the supernatural elements were real or not didn't matter anymore. Dr. Reeves was genuinely planning to destroy my mind, to turn me into a permanent test subject for her twisted experiments. But just as the needle touched my arm, I heard something that made her freeze too. Footsteps on the stairs outside her office. Heavy boots, just like the ones I'd heard in my house. "That's impossible," she whispered. "The building is supposed to be empty." The door opened, and Emma walked in. But this Emma looked different, cleaner, more focused, with normal blue eyes instead of the black voids I remembered. "Hello, Monica," she said calmly. "We need to talk." For the first time since I'd met her, Dr. Reeves looked genuinely afraid. And that's when I realized the most terrifying possibility of all. Maybe the supernatural elements were real, and Dr. Reeves's psychological manipulation was just one layer of a much deeper, more complex horror. Emma moved through Dr. Reeves's office like she owned it, her fingers trailing over books and picture frames with casual familiarity. But this wasn't the manic, black-eyed Emma from my living room. This version was calm, centered, almost eerily normal. "You really thought you could manipulate a contract keeper without consequences?" Emma asked, settling into the chair I'd just vacated. "That's adorable." Dr. Reeves still held the syringe, her hand trembling slightly. "The contracts aren't real. They're mass delusion, shared psychosis brought on by family trauma and mental illness. I've documented everything." "Have you?" Emma pulled out a file folder that was definitely thicker than the one Dr. Reeves had been writing in. "Because I've been documenting too. Every session, every drug you've given her, every false memory you've implanted." She opened the folder, revealing photographs that made my stomach lurch. Pictures of me in Dr. Reeves's office, clearly drugged and disoriented, while she positioned me in compromising situations. More photos showed her going through my purse, copying my keys, entering my house at night while I slept. "Psychological manipulation is one thing," Emma continued. "But breaking and entering, drugging someone without consent, sexual exploitation, those are crimes in this world, not just violations of cosmic law deity." "You're both insane," Dr. Reeves said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I have documentation of your family's history of schizophrenia, narcissistic personality disorder." "Oh, we have mental illnesses," Emma agreed cheerfully. "But that doesn't mean we're wrong about everything else." She pulled out another item that made me gasp. My grandmother's original journal, the real one, not the fake Dr. Reeves had planted. "The thing about soul contracts," Emma said, flipping through pages covered in symbols I recognized from my walls, "is that they work whether you believe in them or not, like gravity. You can deny it exists all you want, but you'll still fall when you jump off a building." Dr. Reeves lunged forward with the syringe, but Emma caught her wrist with inhuman speed. The needle bent against Emma's skin like it was made of rubber, then crumbled to dust. "That's better," Emma said. "Now we can have an honest conversation." The office around us began to change. The walls stretched upward into impossible darkness, and the familiar furniture faded into mist. We were somewhere else now. A circular room with stone walls covered in the same symbols I'd seen in my house, but these ones pulsed with actual light. "Welcome to the real contract chamber," Emma said. "This is where serious negotiations happen." Dr. Reeves was backing toward a door that no longer existed. "This is impossible." Shared hallucination brought on by... By what? A new voice cut through her protests. David stepped out of the shadows, but like Emma, he seemed different here. More substantial, more real. "By the drugs you've been giving Rebecca, the ones that were actually designed to open her psychic channels, not close them?" "What?" I managed to croak. My voice echoed strangely in the stone chamber. David smiled, but it wasn't his usual predatory expression. "Did you really think a small-town therapist could create hallucinogens powerful enough to implant permanent false memories? The compounds she's been using are ancient formulas, designed by the weavers to enhance supernatural perception." Emma nodded. "Every drug she gave you, every false memory she tried to plant, every manipulation she attempted, it all just made you more sensitive to the real contracts that surround us. She was trying to convince you that the supernatural was psychological, but she was actually proving the opposite." The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Dr. Reeves hadn't been debunking the soul contracts. She'd been trying to hide them. The drugs that were supposed to make me delusional had actually been revealing truths I wasn't supposed to see. But why? I asked. Because, said a familiar voice, some contracts are too dangerous to fulfill. Marcus stepped out of the darkness, but he looked nothing like the broken man who'd left me 5 years ago. His eyes held depths I'd never seen before, and when he moved, shadows moved with him. "Hello, Rebecca," he said gently. "I'm sorry it took so long for us to find you." "Find me?" "The real us," Sarah added, emerging from another part of the chamber. "Not the manipulated versions Monica created, but our actual souls. We've been searching for you across multiple lifetimes." Dr. Reeves was pressed against the stone wall now, her professional composure completely shattered. "This isn't real. Mass hypnosis, group delusion, shared psychotic break. The contracts are real, Monica," Marcus said sadly. "You know they are. That's why you've spent your entire career trying to convince people they're not." Emma opened the True Journal to a page near the back. Dr. Monica Reeves, born 1969, agreed to incarnate as a skeptic who would test the faith of genuine psychics. Her role was to challenge belief systems and force spiritual growth through doubt and question. "But she broke her contract," David continued. "Instead of honorable skepticism, she chose manipulation and abuse. Instead of challenging beliefs to strengthen them, she used psychological torture to destroy minds." "And now," Sarah said, holding up what looked like a cosmic legal document, "the contract has to be enforced." The chamber filled with a low humming sound, like machinery starting up. The symbols on the walls began spinning, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Wait," I said, though my voice felt small in the vast space. "If the contracts are real, if we all agreed to this before birth, then what's my role? What did I really choose?" Emma smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it was genuinely warm. "You chose to be the one who could see through deception, the one who could tell the difference between genuine spiritual truth and psychological manipulation. A contract keeper isn't someone who enforces agreements. They're someone who protects people from those who would abuse the system. And Monica," Marcus added, "chose to be the final test. The person who would try every form of manipulation and control to break your ability to discern truth from lies." Dr. Reeves made a sound like a cornered animal. "I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for. I have other subjects, other experiments." She pulled out what looked like a remote control and pressed a button. Immediately my head filled with static, my vision blurred, and the stone chamber began dissolving back into her office. "Chemical override," she gasped. "Emergency protocols. I can bring her back to baseline reality." But as the hallucination, or whatever it was, faded, I realized something crucial. The drugs hadn't been making me see things that weren't there. They'd been making me see things that were always there, but hidden. And now that I knew the difference, no amount of chemical manipulation could make me unsee the truth. Dr. Reeves was still holding her remote, still pressing buttons, but nothing was happening. The stone chamber wasn't fading anymore. If anything, it was becoming more solid, more real than her office had ever been. "Your enforcement period is over, Monica," I said, and my voice carried an authority I'd never felt before. "Thank you for teaching me to recognize the difference between psychological manipulation and genuine spiritual experience. The lesson is complete." The last thing I saw before the chamber filled with blinding light was Dr. Reeves's face, finally showing genuine terror as she realized she'd succeeded too well. She'd made me strong enough to see through any deception, including hers. When the light faded, she was gone, and I was standing in my grandmother's true basement, surrounded by friends who had been waiting for lifetimes for me to remember who I really was. The basement looked different now. The dolls were still there, but they no longer seemed menacing. Instead, they felt like old friends waiting patiently for recognition. Each one represented a soul I'd worked with across multiple lifetimes, people who'd chosen difficult roles to help others grow and learn. The memories come back gradually, Emma said, settling onto a cushioned bench that definitely hadn't been there before. It's easier on the human mind that way. She was right. Images were surfacing like photographs developing in a darkroom. I remember choosing my current life, not as punishment, but as service. I'd volunteered to incarnate as someone who could help souls escape abusive contracts, agreements they'd made in desperation or ignorance, or that had been imposed on them by entities like Dr. Reeves. How long has this been going on? I asked. The contract manipulation? David consulted what looked like an ancient ledger book. About 300 years in this region. Groups like the Weavers figured out how to exploit the system, convincing souls to sign agreements that were more like spiritual slavery than growth opportunity. Marcus handed me a cup of tea that tasted like starlight and summer rain. Your grandmother was one of the first to fight back. She learned to identify false contracts and help people break them. But the work was dangerous. The entities profiting from soul manipulation don't give up their income streams easily. Is that what happened to my real parents? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Sarah nodded sadly. They got too close to be exposing a major operation. Dr. Reeves was just one therapist in a network of hundreds. There are contract manipulators working as doctors, lawyers, teachers, clergy, anyone who has access to vulnerable people during crisis moments. They use a combination of psychological manipulation and supernatural coercion, Emma added, creating artificial traumas to make people desperate enough to sign contracts they don't understand. Then they harvest the resulting suffering like a crop. I thought about all the people I'd met in therapy support groups over the years. How many of them had been trapped in false contracts, convinced they'd chosen their own abuse. So what now? I asked. What am I supposed to do with this knowledge? David opened my grandmother's journal to a page I'd never seen before. It was covered in names, addresses, and detailed notes about ongoing contract violations. There are 17 active cases in this town alone. 17 people trapped in agreements they never really made, suffering under the delusion that they chose their own torment. The choice is yours, Marcus said gently. You can walk away from all this, live a normal life, forget what you've learned. The cosmic system is designed to protect free will, even the free will to ignore your original agreements. But if you choose to accept your role as contract keeper, Sarah added, you'll spend the rest of your life helping people distinguish between authentic spiritual growth and psychological manipulation. It's not easy work. The manipulators fight back, and they have resources we don't. I looked around the basement at these souls who had been my friends across multiple lifetimes. They'd all chosen difficult roles to help me learn and grow. Emma had agreed to experience mental illness so I could understand the difference between spiritual sensitivity and pathology. David had embodied narcissistic abuse so I could learn to recognize emotional manipulation. Marcus had played the unfaithful husband so I could understand the difference between chosen lessons and imposed suffering. Even Dr. Reeves, in her own twisted way, had been fulfilling a contract. She'd agreed to be the ultimate test of my ability to see through deception. The fact that she'd broken her own agreement by choosing genuine malice over honorable skepticism was what had triggered the enforcement protocols. What happens to people like Dr. Reeves? I asked. The ones who break their contracts to harm others? They get what they've chosen, Emma said quietly. A lifetime of experiencing every form of manipulation and abuse they've inflicted on others. Not as punishment, but as education. The cosmic system never stops trying to teach, even when someone has fallen as far as Monica did. I thought about the 17 names in the ledger. 17 people suffering under false contracts, convinced they deserved their pain because they'd supposedly chosen it before birth. How many of them were seeing therapists who reinforced their delusions? How many were trapped in abusive relationships because they believed they'd agreed to be victims? There's something else you should know, Sarah said hesitantly. The network Dr. Reeves was part of, they've been watching you since childhood. Your adoption wasn't random. They specifically chose you because of your bloodline, because of your inherited ability to see true contract. My blood went cold. What do you mean? David pulled out a thick file that made Dr. Reeves's documentation look like amateur hour. Your biological parents weren't just killed for getting too close to the truth. They were contract keepers themselves, part of a family line that goes back centuries. When they were eliminated, the network made sure you'd be placed with adoptive parents who would keep you isolated and unaware of your ability. But grandmother wasn't your adoptive grandmother, Marcus said gently. She was your biological grandmother, your father's mother. She'd been searching for you for decades. When she finally found you 5 years ago, she bought the house next to yours and began the process of awakening your memories gradually. The room spun around me. Everything I thought I knew about my life was dissolving again, but this time it felt different. Not like manipulation or false memories, but like layers of protective deception falling away to reveal a deeper truth. The journal in the attic, I whispered, was her way of preparing you for this moment, Emma confirmed. She knew the network would try to stop her, so she hid the truth in plain sight, made it look like the ramblings of a woman with dementia, knowing that only you would be able to sense the authentic power in those pages. Sarah opened another section of the ledger, revealing a map of the United States dotted with red pins. There are networks like this operating in every major city, Rebecca. Thousands of contract manipulators, all working to convince vulnerable people that their suffering is cosmically ordained. They've perverted the entire concept of soul contracts, turning spiritual growth into spiritual slavery. And they know you're awake now, David added grimly. Dr. Reeves was just the local coordinator. When she disappeared tonight, it triggered alerts throughout their entire system. They'll be coming for you. How long do I have? Maybe a week, Marcus said. They'll need time to mobilize resources, call in specialists. But they won't underestimate you again. I stood up, feeling a strange calm settling over me. The fear that had been my constant companion for months was fading, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years, purpose. Then we have a week to free those 17 people, I said. Emma smiled, and I saw a flash of the cosmic beam. She truly was, ancient, wise, fiercer than any earthly predator. I was hoping you'd say that. It won't be easy, Sarah warned. Some of them have been trapped in false contracts for decades. They'll resist having their reality challenged, especially if manipulation has become their identity. And the manipulators won't just stand by and watch, David added. They'll fight back with everything they have. Psychological warfare, supernatural coercion, even physical violence if necessary. I thought about Dr. Reeves's final moments, the genuine terror in her eyes when she realized her enforcement period was over. The cosmic system had been patient with her for decades, giving her chance after chance to fulfill her true contract. But eventually every soul had to face the consequences of their choices. What about after? I asked. After we free the 17 people, what then? Marcus consulted what looked like a star chart covered in constantly shifting symbols. That depends on what the network does. If they retreat, regroup, try a different approach, we'll have time to help you master your abilities, teach you the advanced techniques your parents never got to pass down. But if they escalate, Emma said quietly, if they decide you're too dangerous to live, then we'll have to make some hard choices about how far we're willing to go to protect the work. The weight of it settled on me like a heavy cloak. I wasn't just choosing to help 17 people. I was choosing to enter a war that had been going on for centuries, a conflict between those who saw souls as resources to be exploited and those who believed in genuine spiritual freedom. There's one more thing, Sarah said, pulling out a mirror that reflected not my current face, but something deeper. The essence of who I truly was across all lifetimes. If you accept this role, If you become the contract keeper your bloodline was meant to produce, you can never go back to ignorance. You'll see the manipulation everywhere. In advertising, in politics, in religions, in relationships. You'll know when people are being exploited and you'll feel compelled to help. It's a lonely path, David added. Most people prefer their comfortable illusions to uncomfortable truths. They'll resist your help, sometimes violently. And the manipulators will make sure you're always portrayed as the crazy one, the dangerous one, the one who can't be trusted. I looked around the basement one more time, at the dolls that represented souls I'd worked with throughout lifetimes, at the friends who had sacrificed their own comfort to help me remember who I was. Then I looked at the ledger with its 17 names, 17 people suffering under the delusion that they deserved their pain. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was recognition. I accept, I said. The moment the words left my mouth, the basement transformed completely. The walls expanded into something that might have been a library or a cathedral, or a courtroom, or all three at once. Books filled shelves that stretched impossibly high, their pages containing the true contracts of every soul who had ever chosen to incarnate. And at the center of it all was a desk that had been waiting for me since before I was born. "Welcome home, contract keeper," Emma said formally. "Let's get to work." As I sat down at the desk and opened the first case file, I felt my grandmother's presence settle around me like a warm embrace. Her journal materialized beside me, its pages now filled with tools and techniques I would need to distinguish between authentic spiritual agreements and imposed manipulation. The war for human consciousness was about to begin in earnest. But for the first time since finding that journal in the attic, I felt ready. Outside, I could hear footsteps approaching the house, heavy boots, multiple sets, moving with military precision. The network was already mobilizing, faster than my friends had expected. I smiled and reached for the first weapon in the contract keeper's arsenal. The phone number of a reporter who had been searching her whole life for a story exactly like this one. The footsteps stopped at my front door. Someone knocked, polite but insistent. "Rebecca Chen?" came a voice that tried to sound official and friendly. "We're from the State Mental Health Authority. We have some concerns about your recent psychological evaluations." I looked at my friends, all of whom were grinning with anticipation. "Should we let them in?" I asked. "Oh yes," Emma said, her eyes beginning to glow with that familiar otherworldly light. "It's been too long since we've had visitors who genuinely deserve what's coming to them." I walked upstairs to answer the door, grandmother's journal tucked under my arm and 17 names burning in my memory. The real work was about to begin. And I couldn't wait to show these manipulators what happened when they tried to exploit someone who finally remembered how to fight back. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. "Coming," I called cheerfully, reaching for the handle. After all, some contracts, like the one that bound manipulators to face the consequences of their actions, were absolutely meant to be enforced.